Hi, everyone, and welcome to the US Government Tech Meetup and Podcast. I'm Jacqueline Sklar, host of the group. Today's session is Mission Ready AI, Securing the Future of National Defense. We're thrilled to be joined by Lili Davoudian, sales leader at Microsoft's National Security Group. Lili works directly with defense and intelligence teams and brings deep expertise in AI, cloud security, and zero trust architecture.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Lili Davoudian, and I work in cybersecurity at Microsoft. I'm here today to talk about mission-ready AI and how we can use AI to better secure our nation's defenses. Everyone is encountering AI at some point in their either personal lives or job worlds today. It's really changing how we work. And I'm sure everyone has experienced that. So I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But one of the biggest changes that we're seeing is how we secure AI and how enterprise IT shops think about that. The main focus of my talk today is around the dual edge of AI for security and security for AI. So I think AI for security is something that we're all pretty used to talking about when we think about, like, how does machine learning help us with anomaly detection? This has been baked into a host of security products for years now. What's new is the fact that we also need to secure these AI systems, and how can we do that? I'll talk specifically about Microsoft's ecosystem, from the SOC teams to the compliance teams, how we have solutions that map to personas and to workflows to help build this integrated end-to-end ecosystem to not only have security to help us be better defenders, but also to protect our AI ecosystems. My big takeaway for everyone watching is that I know it can be very daunting when we think about these AI tools, especially GenAI products that live in browsers like ChatGPT. Thinking about visibility, thinking about data can be very overwhelming. But it's incredibly important to start somewhere. So think about, like, where is AI being used in your organization? Think about classifying your data. Think about applying controls to your data. The sooner you start laying that foundation, the safer the future with AI will be, because we know it's not going anywhere. So again, I think that the transformational power of generative AI is pretty clear to all of us. I'm sure everyone is using ChatGPT extensively. You might be using OpenAI to some degree, maybe some of the Microsoft Copilots. And it's been incredible for productivity, for data-driven decision-making, also for innovation. One of the early plays of AI that I personally loved was the design ideas in PowerPoint. If you are someone like me who is deeply uncreative, I think it's given us a lot of ability to have more creativity. I'm pretty sure I made these slides with some variation of AI. So all of this has been incredibly exciting. We also just see a lot of new risks, right? The potential for data leakage has grown, whether that's through AI prompting, through model training. One of the biggest challenges I hear repeatedly from customers is just an overwhelming lack of visibility. It's hard to protect when you don't know what is at stake. There are also concerns about accidental or intentional exposure of sensitive data. So if you don't have your data labeled and GenAI apps are overexposed to data, there's data oversharing. This is a huge challenge. So I think a lot of customers that I talk to struggle with just this dual edge nature, that these capabilities are so powerful, but they also introduce new risks. And so what I'd like to talk about today is how we can empower organizations to innovate with AI without opening the door for new threats. So I'll talk about, this entire security stack and how it can help you build a posture that's AI ready, both in terms of protecting your use of AI, but also how we can better use AI to enhance our defenses. So drilling down a little bit on the challenges, because I think there's been a lot of AI fears in the news without clear explanations of what they are. If you've seen like any superhero movie recently, the villain has always become like the AI. If you're a Mission Impossible fan like me, there's no longer like, oh, this bad person. It's like the AI is trying to take over the world. So what do we mean by that, right? These are real concerns that we have. Number one is when we think about threats to AI models. AI, of course, is a tool, but the models powering these AI tools are valuable assets, and they face attacks just like any other digital resource. We can have data poisoning, which is where attackers inject malicious code during training to manipulate outcomes. We see model theft, which is really a form of IP theft, where adversaries are trying to copy or misuse proprietary AI models. We also know that when things move fast, it's hard for security teams to keep up. It's hard for regulation to keep up. So even in the US government space, which is where I focus, as hard as the administrations have been trying, when you have new capabilities emerging weekly, if not daily, it's very difficult to build defenses that won't be obsolete. So how can we balance this innovation with agility? We're also seeing massive adoption across the workforce. And I think we can all speak to this in our own lives. It's, again, amazing for innovation, amazing for productivity. But what it means is that there's so much AI activity happening without traditional IT oversight. We call this shadow IT and shadow AI. And so without visibility into these activities, there's a lot of uncontrolled data sharing. There could be accidental compliance violations. So we want to bring all of this back into the purview of the IT teams. We also see just the human element always being a very important factor, right? So humans want to use AI to be more productive. They want to use it to write faster code. They want to use it to create content, but they need guardrails. They need education so that they're not exposing sensitive information or creating any blind spots for security. The last thing I want to talk about when we think about challenges is the fact that anytime there is a new tool, attackers adopt it faster than we do. Why is that? It's because they don't have compliance requirements. There's no regulation. And so we've just seen that attackers are taking AI and making the speed, scale, and sophistication of their attacks increase more than we could have imagined. I'm particularly interested in nation state actors because of the space that I cover with the DoD community. But even like low-level cybercrime is using AI to be more persuasive and more aggressive. So everywhere we look, we not only need to think about how can we use AI to tip the scale in favor of defenders to be able to see more, respond faster, respond better, but also when we think about this AI tooling, how can we close that and avoid having an additional attack vector through which we could see further misconfigurations and further security alerting. So with that picture, I want to shift to talk a little bit about the Microsoft ecosystem and how we can help. I recognize this is a very wordy slide, which I typically try to avoid, but I'm going to break this down by product area. So again, the important framing here is that we're thinking about AI and security from two angles. We're thinking about how can we use AI to have better defenses? That's AI for security. How can we use artificial intelligence to make our teams faster, more effective, more proactive in detecting and responding to threats, right? That's how we tip the scale in favor of defenders. But then we have this equally urgent but newer need of securing AI. We want to make sure the data, the infrastructure, the access patterns tied to these AI models are protected. They're protected from misuse, from misconfiguration, even from outright attacks. And so all of the products that I've listed here, I tried to keep it to 5 to avoid being very overwhelming, contribute to both of these goals. And so I'll kind of walk through each of these one by one. Historically, we focus the products on built-in features around AI, and that's kind of the third row there. So when I worked on the Defender for Cloud product team, a big push that we had is how can we embed AI into the tooling to make the tooling better? We have also started to think about the flip side of that, which is how can we better use these tools for security? So let's deep dive into that. So Purview is a very underrated product that's really focused on data governance. So how can you discover data? How can you classify data? And how can you protect data across the environment? This really started as more of a compliance tool, and it's evolved to really be the backbone of how we think about securing AI. So when we think about security for AI, one of the biggest risks is exposing sensitive data. When you call on ChatGPT or when you put a prompt in Copilot, it is rummaging through so many different types of data that you might not even know you had access to. and we are trying to avoid data oversharing, you could also accidentally be putting things into your prompts that are maybe proprietary company data, and we want to minimize the likelihood of spillage there. And that's where Copilot that's where Purview really comes in. We're trying to make sure that sensitive data is labeled and controlled before it ever touches an AI model. What this does is it empowers humans to confidently use AI in regulated environments like the US government, sensitive environments like healthcare or banks, knowing data is protected from the beginning. When we think about security of AI, we're also really focused on using machine learning to power these classifications. So before you would have to be you'd have a compliance analyst or a data protection officer who would be manually labeling data, which is increasingly tiresome and also somewhat objective. And so what we try and do is use machine learning so that we can label your data based on our existing knowledge set and really speed up the time to make it faster to get to green on products like Copilot and other generative AI tooling. So Purview is really our backbone because the backbone of all generative AI is data, and we want to make sure that from the onset, that data is secure. So Defender for Cloud is really how we think about securing workloads and infrastructure. We provide proactive posture management, but we also provide threat detection. So it's really a dual-edged product. We're trying to think about how can we minimize the likelihood of misconfigurations, but if a misconfiguration does occur, how can we give you recommendations to quickly fix that? So when it comes to securing the infrastructure that runs AI, Defender is really essential. It hardens your workloads, whether you're hosting large language models, whether you're hosting AI services, and it really helps you make sure that your posture is strong through identifying misconfigurations and supporting best practices. And that's a big pillar when we think about the security of AI. We want to ensure that the platforms that AI relies on aren't exposed to attacks. We also are doing a lot here to make it easier for defenders by reducing misconfigurations. So you can see that having Defender typically reduces misconfigurations by about 50%. So we're in a much stronger place from a proactive perspective to minimize the likelihood of attack and stay up to date as we deploy new resources in the cloud. Finally, when we think about Sentinel, this is our cloud-native SIM/SOAR product that is really using AI to detect, investigate, and respond to threats at scale. This is a very important part of how we monitor AI environments and detect AI-based threats. When we think about securing AI, Sentinel is key for its overtime analysis. So it's very good at spotting unusual behavior in AI services for infrastructure. And then when we think about when we think about using AI for security, one of the biggest features in Sentinel is something called UEBA, which is User Entity Behavioral Analytics, which is how we think about users or entities like IP addresses and what their behavior is relative to their past behavior, but also relative to the behavior of their peers. And this type of machine learning does a great job of helping us identify where there might be an attack or some kind of breach based on current and past behavior. What this does from a AI for security perspective is it really helps minimize the amount of false positives, but it also helps us hunt proactively and minimize the likelihood of breach. And then finally, a big part of the challenge that we have with generative AI is this shadow AI. And so Defender for Cloud Apps is our CASB solution that provides visibility and control into cloud app usage. The goal here is to prevent data loss and prevent against any kind of shadow IT risk. So the use case here is really how can we block sensitive data from being pasted into public AI tools? So I'll give you kind of the real world example of how Purview and Defender for Cloud Apps play in Copilot and with ChatGPT. So I use ChatGPT very extensively, like many do. Now, when I go to paste something into ChatGPT on my work computer, everything goes through a Purview and Defender for Cloud Apps check to make sure that as data is moving through the system, it is meant to be shared in that way. So we're really focused on thinking about sensitive data and making sure it doesn't end up in unauthorized AI tooling, like any kind of unmanaged SaaS application or GenAI application. Defender for Cloud Apps is also just incredible when we think about using AI for security, because it provides excellent behavioral analytics and really good real-time data loss prevention to stop risky data access or uploads that could compromise the integrity of your ecosystem. So we really see both there. But the great thing about Defender for Cloud Apps is when we think about third-party usage, which is so prevalent today. We saw after ChatGPT came out, a lot of companies, especially organizations in the defense space, came out and said, we're just going to ban ChatGPT. And I think that's a really limiting view of the potential of AI. And this is a great example of how you can still empower your employees to use tooling like ChatGPT, but give them the guardrails that they need so that they don't accidentally leak any kind of data. And then hopefully everyone's heard of Security Copilot, since that is kind of our platform or key GenAI tool. It's an AI-powered assistant that really accelerates threat analytics and incident response. It does this by summarizing alerts. It does this by generating queries for you that allow for threat hunting. It also does a great job of automating investigations. So Copilot is just an excellent example of scaling SecOps. It does such a good job of taking AI and making your security team so much more efficient and so much stronger. There are two things I really like about Copilot. One is the fact that it can write KQL queries for you, so it can do a bunch of hunting for you. The reason this is so important is because there is such a skilling gap in cyber. We do not have enough cybersecurity professionals. And when we automate some of these hard skills, we allow for this kind of next generation of SOC analysts to come who maybe don't know how to write KQL queries on the spot, but are able to speak to Copilot and get that support. Another thing that Copilot does very well is creating PowerPoints that summarize incidents. And so when we first released Copilot, there were 3 use cases. And one of them was that we would create PowerPoints based on alerts. And we all thought that customers would say like, cool, but of all the things Copilot could do, this is not that interesting to me. And customers actually loved it, because if you think about it, if you're in the middle of an alert, if you're in the middle of triaging and investigating, the last thing you want to do is make a PowerPoint presentation. I think the last thing you want to do ever is create a PowerPoint presentation. And so this just really helped the SOC analysts, the incident response managers focus on what's important and respond to threats faster, which is what, using AI for security is all about. So with that, I want to jump to the second section of the presentation where I really want to focus on securing AI. I think that having AI in our security tooling has been such an integral part of Microsoft's security ecosystem for years that some of the features I mentioned, whether that's UEBA or data loss prevention that have built-in machine learning, hopefully are more familiar. But the securing AI piece is really new, and it is based on what we've seen at this real explosion of GenAI applications. I was thinking about how to frame this today, and I thought that doing it through Zero Trust would actually be quite interesting. Again, I support the US government, and so on the DoD side of the house, we've just seen Zero Trust explode from the mandate coming out of CIO's office that by 2027, all agencies will have to meet a baseline level of zero trust. Since then, I've also seen that outside of the DoD, the demand for zero trust principles to guide the security story has been incredibly important. And so I want to talk a little bit today about how we can use these zero trust principles to accelerate the securing AI story, and how in turn that actually puts us in a better place when we think about the zero trust journey over time. So I think that we sometimes overextend on what it means to protect generative AI. I think it sounds extremely daunting since this is somewhat new for all of us. And I think at the end of the day, I do want to just ground us and say that we need to remember that when we think about the security of GenAI applications and all of its related components, we can think about it the same way we do traditional apps and infrastructure. So we need to think about things like, is our data secure through the AI lifecycle? Who can access our AI models and data? how do we protect these applications from threats? And that's very similar to conversations we have around traditional application security. So when we think about AI risks, I think I've spent quite a bit of time talking about the secure AI challenges, right? So these are things that we've already seen. So data exfiltration, which can happen via prompts or via tooling. This is one of the bigger risks, which is that if a user or an attacker uses prompts or AI tools to extract sensitive information that should have never been exposed. And this is where Purview and Defender for Cloud Apps can come in that I mentioned earlier. We're also seeing remote code execution. This has been increasing as AI agents and plugins are becoming more powerful. We're trying to avoid them being used in unintended ways, and Copilot can help with this significantly. We also see that adversaries are trying to extract model weights or system designs to replicate or misuse or tamper with your AI systems. And so there's a lot we can do here with Defender for Cloud that helps us monitor suspicious patterns that could indicate that there's probing happening on the model. And then prompt injection attacks, I think, have been very aggressively highlighted recently, where basically users can craft inputs to override system instructions. And so this is something that we're also working on through Defender for Cloud Apps and some of the other tooling that I mentioned earlier. The one piece that is also very important to us at Microsoft is the responsible AI notion. And so this is not as much an outright security risk, but this is when we think about things like hallucinating content, when we think about creating content that is biased or offensive or harmful. For us at Microsoft, we want to make sure that there's trust in everything that we do. And we are very adamant in making sure that we have the right safeguards in place, that we're grounding everything with real data, that we're using things like RAG, and we're thinking about responsible AI in a really meaningful way, because that's just as important to us as the security side of the house. So I think that in order to make kind of some of this AI security a bit more close to home, I wanted to frame it in the same way we think about cloud, which is just that shared responsibility model. And security is a shared responsibility. We all know this. It's very similar to traditional cloud computing, where no single entity is going to own 100% of the risk. In AI, this model becomes even more nuanced, because you're not just dealing with infrastructure, right? You also have to think about the data, the models, the applications, and always the most challenging, which is the human behavior. So at the foundation, as the cloud and AI service provider, Microsoft is responsible for securing the platform. And that includes things like protecting the model infrastructure, ensuring the security and compliance of all of the endpoints that Azure OpenAI might run on. We are also responsible for patching and hardening the environments that host these models. And we also want to make sure that all of our tooling, whether that's Copilot or something else, is built with security and compliance and privacy by design. Despite that, customers still have significant responsibilities here. So the customer is going to control what data is put inside these models. They also control who has access and under what condition. The biggest responsibility I see on the customer side is also around monitoring and policy applications to make sure that that usage is in line with your business workflows. And then we also see developers as part of this equation, right? Because they might be fine-tuning models. They might be using Copilot Studio to build their own custom models. And so when we think about shared responsibility, that doesn't at all dilute the responsibility. There's still a big part for all of us to play here. And at Microsoft, we're very committed to doing our part to making this as secure as we can. And so if we go back to what I kind of started the session on, which is around using AI in alignment with zero trust principles, I'm sure everyone is familiar with zero trust, which is really anchored on three things: assume breach, use least privilege, and verify explicitly. And so very similar to security and AI, when you think about AI and zero trust, there are the two angles, right? There's how can you secure all components of AI with zero trust principles? So how can you understand the use cases of your application? Who has access? A lot of this comes with understanding your own risk tolerance. But then you also want to use AI to enable and accelerate zero trust. So you want to think about how AI can help detect and block threats and make you more efficient and resolving the gaps that you have in your zero trust posture. And I think that given the massive commitment, not just from the DoD, but across a lot of our customers to having more zero trust reliant architectures and the push and increase in scale of AI applications, putting these things together is actually a great way to think about it. And so not only do we need the zero trust principles to drive safe, responsible, secure AI usage, but in turn, that's also going to accelerate our zero trust journey. And this is where I think zero trust becomes really essential. As we talked about at the beginning, generative AI introduces continuous change and, quite frankly, disruption, which is very powerful for innovation, but very difficult when we think about legacy approaches. Because zero trust assumes breach, because we think about verifying explicitly every single time and policies like least privilege, when you apply that to AI, it means really locking down your posture. So we start with people and we think about the fact that we need to educate our teams to use AI responsibly. We need to use tooling around identity to have strong identity management, to have strong conditional access so that we know who's using these AI tools. Data obviously remains incredibly important. We need to protect that data. As I talked about with Purview, we're going to use Purview to classify that data, to label it, to govern it. And we're going to do this automatically so that before the user even starts engaging with this generative AI tooling, the data has already been cleaned up. And then going back to Defender for Cloud apps, we're going to use that to get visibility into all of your AI usage, whether that's sanctioned or unsanctioned. And then through machine learning powered tools like data loss prevention, we're going to make sure that only the data that makes sense is going into the prompts that these tools are using. And then, of course, protecting the infrastructure remains incredibly important. This is where Defender for Cloud comes in that I mentioned. It's going to help us understand if there's unusual activity. It's going to help us make sure we have secure configurations from the beginning. And then finally, the monitoring comes with Microsoft Sentinel that helps us understand how this AI is being used. It helps us see anomalies, again, with machine learning, and we can use it to flag threats in real time. When we think about Copilot for security, we can bring that in to do quicker investigation and to get faster remediation and have a stronger security posture holistically. And so we know that generative AI cannot be secured with old paradigms. I talked about that at the beginning. There's just too much change. But when we apply zero trust, we can secure this future of AI, but we can evolve at the same speed of innovation so that we don't have to turn off tooling because we're worried about the security posture. So if you bring that all together, including some of the products I talked about earlier, you can see it across usage, applications, and the platform here. So you can see how we're using Purview to categorize our data to make sure that we're not accidentally leaking sensitive data. We use Defender for Cloud that you can see next to Purview to make sure that that underlying infrastructure is secure. We have a high dependency on Defender for Cloud apps to track that usage and to have visibility into your shadow AI over time. And all of this is coming together through a really holistic end-to-end ecosystem. This is not about protecting AI with one product or one tool. This is an extremely layered approach that thinks about each part of the stack so that you can innovate at the scale of AI without any fears of introducing additional risk into your environment. And so as we wrap up, I kind of wanted to talk through 5 core concepts that can really be the anchor for any AI security strategy. These are really practical things that I've kind of learned through customer conversations that can help organizations navigating this space. As always, the humans are the most important part. And so user training is the beginning. AI is intuitive. I'm sure we've all found, even my parents tell me like, oh, I use ChatGPT for my board minutes. But secure AI usage is not. And so we need to make sure that employees have very clear guidance on what's safe, what's risky, and how to use AI responsibly. And you need to do that through education. Data access obviously is increasingly important, since that is the oil through which we are running all of this generative AI tooling. So we need to know where the data is, how sensitive it is, who's allowed to use it. Data does not change just because it is being used by AI, but AI definitely magnetizes where our sensitive data is, and we really need to get ahead of that. When we think about shadow AI, that's just increasingly important for us to have visibility. And so that's where we think about app controls and understanding how employees and users are using third-party tooling. And then AI model controls is just really about owning your AI. Transparency, versioning, clear boundaries around what models can access and how they behave is incredibly important. And then the AI operations are continuous, right? So we need to have ongoing monitoring, ongoing logging, auditing, tuning. So the big thing to take away with this is that AI security is going to need to become a foundational piece of your core security strategy. And this is something we need to start building in immediately into all of our security postures so that we can empower everyone to innovate and defend at the speed and scale of AI, again, without opening an additional area for attack. So these are just some recommendations I put based on where you may be in your GenAI journeys. It's always good to see where it's being used in your org to get that visibility. Regardless of if you're using generative AI tools or not, you will one day. And so think about your data and make sure that you're classifying it and protecting it. When you see AI-related behavior and when you get that visibility, we need to be monitoring it over time. So these are extremely agile programs. And then finally, this is not something that just affects compliance teams or just affects data teams. We need to be collaborating across groups so that we can really have a holistic story here. And then I'll close by saying that there are a lot of certifications that we offer at Microsoft to help drive a deeper understanding of this tooling. And I put those here. I'm happy to share the deck after the fact.
Thank you to Lili Davoudian for sharing her insights today. Coming up, I'm planning a series of short, practical sessions introducing regulatory frameworks like CMMC and GDPR, designed to make compliance less intimidating and more actionable. September 10th, a session in that series will be Compliance Basics, Decoding NIST, Security Standards and Smarter Systems, featuring Senior Technical Project Manager Rena Cummings. The US Government Tech Meetup and Podcast is produced by me and Hot Robot, a creative communications firm focused on high-stakes works in government and technology. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.